After I signed the contract for 30 million, I went to my husband's officito to give him the good news. I barely put my hand on the doorknob when a strange sound from inside made me stop in my tracks. Through the crack in the door, I saw that man and my daughter-in-law in an intimate attitude. And then I did something but before we continue, check if you've already subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We'd love to know how far our revenge stories go. The morning of that day began as any other in my 30 years of life. The soft light of dawn in Zacatecas was coming through the window and illuminated a small card on the dining room table. I touched it with my fingertips and I smiled. It was a gift from Daniela, my daughter-in-law, from yesterday. Inside was the first image off the grandson's ultrasound that she and her husband had awaited with such enthusiasm for years. I could already picture myself with that little one in my arms, listening to his laughter. Filling this house, while I was lost in those sweet thoughts, suddenly the phone rang and it brought me back to reality. It was Mr. Mendoza, a difficult partner from Oaxaca. I felt a slight knot in my chest. I had dedicated all my efforts to that project for months. After a few minutes of tense conversation, just as I was preparing myself to receive a negative response from the other side, he lowered his voice and then declared firmly, "Congratulations, Mrs. Lopez. The 30 million peso contract is yours now." My whole body started to tremble, not out of fear, but out of joy. I thanked Mr. Mendoza and stopped. With a broken voice, I felt an explosion of pride in my chest. 3 months of nonstop work, sleepless nights with the plans, nonstop travel. It was all worth it. The first person with whom I wanted to share this joy was undoubtedly Ramiro, my husband, my life partner, and the co-founder of our real estate company. From the days when we had nothing, I decided not to call him. News like this is delivered in person that I wanted to surprise him. I changed quickly, putting on an elegant dress, and I drove to our trusted wine store. I chose the best bottle of tequila, Family Reserve, the one Ramiro always praised. That would be our celebratory gift. I ordered a taxi to enjoy the quiet part of the urban landscape. I felt proud of a rented office and a half-falling roof from the days where we shared a single bread roll. We had built an empire. Ramiro was in charge of external relations. I handled the finances and internal operations. We were a perfect team in the Mexican real estate world. Our office building stood firm in the center of the city. I entered the lobby and greeted with a gesture Sophia, the receptionist who had been with us for more than 20 years. She smiled broadly at me. "Good morning, Mrs. Lopez de Mar. Ramiro is with a visitor in his office." I smiled back, thinking that surely it was another important client. I went up in the elevator to the top floor where Ramiro's office was. The heavy oak door was ajar, leaving barely a slit. I was about to knock, but I stopped dead in my tracks upon hearing a soft laugh that came from within, a clear and very familiar laugh. It was Daniela. I thought she was visiting her father-in-law. Nothing unusual. But then I heard Ramiro's deep voice. "Once the transfer has been made, everything will be all right." That phrase left me unsettled, and then Daniela's high-pitched voice boomed, with every word clearly like a direct stab to the heart. "Don't worry, Dad. Guillermo is sterile, but he doesn't know it. The baby I have is yours. Nobody will suspect a thing." The tequila bottle slipped from my weak hands and crashed to the ground. The sound of glass breaking on the marble was dry. The liquor and the sharp pieces spread everywhere. Due to cruel fate, the thick Persian rug in front of the door absorbed almost all the noise, preventing it from being heard inside. I was breathless, my heart paralyzed inside. The silence lasted a few seconds. And then the whispers continued. My whole body was trembling. An invisible force propelled me. It forced me to face the truth. Carefully, I leaned over and looked through the crack. The image that appeared before my eyes made my whole world fall apart. Ramiro was sitting in his chair, and Daniela, standing next to him. His hand caressed tenderly my daughter-in-law's slightly bulging belly. That hand was right over the spot where, until a few minutes ago, I thought my grandson was growing. They continued talking. Ramiro's voice was cold and calculating. The debt of 81 billion pesos from his shady dealings. The plan to use a forged signature of Manito legalized the loan documents, making me the sole debtor. The plan to transfer all the company's legal assets to a shell company in the name of Daniela. And then I heard Ramiro's mocking laughter. That old woman has spent her whole life stuck at home. You give her a paper to sign and she signs it. She has no idea about anything. My whole world turned upside down. I took a staggering step back and my foot tripped over a piece of broken glass. The sharp pain in my ankle shot direct to my brain, but it was nothing compared to the pain that tore at my chest. The blood began to flow, soaking the thin fabric of my shoe. I turned around and walked like a sleepwalker. My mind was blank. I felt nothing anymore. As I passed through reception, Sophia shouted at me, worried. "Mrs. Lopez, are you okay? Your foot is bleeding." I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. I was soulless and left the building. I don't remember how I took a taxi to go back home. IT was all a blur of streetlights, ignoring pointless honking. When I arrived, I slammed the door shut. The house to which I had dedicated all my youth building now seemed cold and strange to me, almost frightening. The big photo of our wedding hanging on the living room wall, where Ramiro smiles hugging me, now seemed like a cruel mockery of my stupidity. That night Ramiro returned and I heard his car, the sound of the keys in the lock. He entered carrying a bouquet of red roses, my favorites. He smiled with that warm, fake smile off always. "Alma, when you came back I was waiting for you at the office." I turned away, avoiding his gaze, my voice hoarse. I felt a little unwell, so I went back early to rest. He suspected nothing. He left the flowers on the table and began to tell me about his exhausting workday, about the difficult client had been dealing with. Every word that came out of his mouth was a lie. I knew very well who that client was today. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in bed turning my back on Ramiro. My whole body was tense. I could clearly hear his soft snores, that sound I had heard for 30 years. But that night it disgusted me. I didn't cry out loud. I just pressed my lips together as the tears fell silently, soaking one side of the pillow. Memories of the past were returning, and no one could stop them. I remembered when we started the business together, sharing a single bed in a rented and dilapidated office. I remembered when I was seriously ill and he spent the night awake taking care of me. I remembered when he held Guillermo, our newborn son, and excitedly said was the most valuable treasure of his life. And suddenly, a distant memory came back to my mind. The old rumors about how Ramiro secured his first contracts using certain disreputable services to win over partners. That time I got angry and dismissed them, convinced they were envious people making things up about my husband. I had believed him blindly. Now, with bitterness, I understood that his essence had never changed. Only his lies had become more sophisticated. The next day, the sun rose as usual, out of habit. Ramiro woke up first, turned around and, as every day, leaned in to kiss me on the cheek. But this time, everything was different. The moment his lips touched my skin, a feeling of icy repulsion ran down my back that I shuddered, unable to stop myself. Ramiro noticed it immediately. He sat up on his elbow, frowning, and asked, "Are you okay? Did you have a nightmare?" I opened my eyes, looked at the ceiling, and answered hurriedly, "Yes, it was just a bad dream." I waited for Ramiro to leave the house, for the sound of his car's engine disappear at the end of the street. Then I acted immediately. The paralysis from yesterday had vanished, replaced by a cold determination. I went to my old office, rummaged through the desk drawer until I found an old contact book with a dusty cover. I turned the pages one by one, my fingers slightly trembling, and then I found it. Victor Reyes, Private Investigator's Office. Victor used to be one of the best detectives in the police department before going independent. An old friend, someone I knew I could trust. I dialed his number. My voice was still trembling, but every word came out firmly. "Victor, this is Alma, and I need to see you. It's urgent." We agreed to meet in a small cave hidden in an alley in the old quarter, a place where I knew Ramiro would never go. After hanging up, I went into the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. Then I took the bar of soap and rubbed it vigorously in the cheek where Ramiro had kissed me. I rubbed again and again until the skin turned red and burned. The next 2 weeks passed as if they were 2 centuries. Every day was a performance where I was the lead actress, playing the role of a happy wife, an excited mother-in-law because of the arrival of her grandson. I prepared Ramiro's coffee every morning, said goodbye with a smile when he went to work, and received him with a hot dinner upon returning. But behind that smile, a frozen plan was beginning to take shape. I had already given Victor the information and asked him to follow the two traders. By the middle of the second week, Daniela called me. Her voice was honeyed. "Mom, are you free this weekend? Come with me to buy things for the baby. I want you to be the first to choose something for him." I got a lump in my throat, but I recovered quickly. I feigned joy and answered, "Of course, daughter. I was just waiting for that." We agreed to meet in a luxury shopping mall. She took my arm, chattering about the changes in her body. I and the baby clothing store. She took a little pastel pink dress, held it in front of her belly, and asked me with shining eyes, "Do you think it's cute, Mom? I hope our baby has his dad's eyes, Ramiro." I felt my stomach lurched. I had to bite my lip to avoid vomiting right then and there. I forced myself to smile. "It's beautiful, daughter. He's sure to look very handsome." As if that weren't enough, Daniela continued, speaking with pride in her voice. "Dad Ramiro has been working a lot lately. He says he does many extra hours in the office. He wants to make sure our son has everything he needs." I knew perfectly well what those extra hours meant and where they took place. I just nodded silently, pretending to be a naive mother-in-law. That performance exhausted me more than any business negotiation. The following afternoon, I received a message. IT had no return address, just an address and a time that I knew it was Victor's. The address led me to a hidden alley behind the old market. Victor's office was on the second floor off a building worn down by time. Victor was sitting behind his desk. He looked much older than the last time I saw him. Deep wrinkles around his eyes were witnesses to the harsh truth she had seen in his career. He didn't say many words. He just pushed a thick brown envelope toward me. His voice was deep, serious. "Alma, I have to ask you one more time. Are you sure you want to see this? Once you do, there's no going back." I looked him straight in the eyes and nodded firmly. My hand did not tremble when I received the envelope. Doubt and weakness had died in Metwo weeks ago. I tore it open right there, in front of Victor. The first photo appeared, Ramiro and Daniela inside a car. He wasn't driving. He had turned completely toward her. His hand rested with complete possession in her thigh. They were both smiling broadly, with the smile of those who know they will be the winners. Second photo. They were standing in front of a motel counter on the outskirts of the city, that kind of cheap and discreet place ideal for clandestine dates. Ramiro handed over the papers while Daniela hid behind him. Last photo. They were leaving the motel the next morning, clothes wrinkled. Daniela was leaning, exhausted, on Ramiro's shoulder in a gesture of intimacy that gave me chills. I flipped through the photos coldly. Almost without feeling anything, my face showed not a trace of emotion. Victor looked at me with pity. Perhaps he expected a different reaction, a collapse, some tears, but he saw nothing. He sighed and left on the tablia a small USB flash drive and some headphones. The most important part is here. I placed a professional recording device under the seat of Ramiro's car. You should listen to it alone. I took the USB drive, put it carefully in my bag, and stood up. "How much do I owe you, Victor?" "We'll talk about it later," he replied. "First, take care of yourself, Alma." I didn't go home immediately. I drove to the outskirts, to a secluded parking lot in the top of a hill from where I could see the whole valley. Zacatecas stretched out before my eyes, quiet and indifferent. I turned off the engine. The silence was overwhelming. With trembling hands, I plugged the USB into the car and put on the headphones. After a slight buzzing, the silence was broken by Daniela's giggles. Then Ramiro's voice appeared, with that tired and complaining tone I already knew too well. It's becoming increasingly unbearable. Always asking where I'm going, what I do. Old women, what a nuisance. Daniela laughed maliciously and mockingly. Guillermo is just as stupid as his mother. I tell him I have cravings, that I want this or that thing, and he runs to buy it without suspecting a thing. He's an idiot. And then came the most terrifying part off the entire recording, clearer and more detailed than what I had heard behind the door that day. Ramiro's voice sounded icy, calculating. Let him believe it with all his heart. When the baby is born, We empty the company's funds and leave him with the 8 billion peso debt. The old woman won't have anything left, and off we go to Panama. There we can start again, you, me, and our son. I remained motionless inside the car, squeezing the steering wheel with such force that my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, I had no tears left. The pain in me had frozen, turned into a sharp block of ice inside my chest. I violently grabbed the headphones and threw them into the compartment as if they were a poisonous snake. I started the engine, turned around, and drove back home. The evidence Victor gave me had uncovered that disgusting relationship, but I didn't just want to destroy Ramiro. I wanted to recover what was mine and my son's. I needed more financial evidence. Numbers that don't know how to lie. The opportunity came over the weekend. Ramiro announced he had a golf game all day with a partner. A perfect excuse, You said to cover up dirty encounters. He left early that morning, dressed in sportswear, looking happy and whistling, as if he were heading somewhere where pleasures awaited him. Before crossing the threshold, he turned around and blurted out a sentence, not knowing he was giving himself away. "Oh, and if Daniela calls today, tell her I'm in an emergency meeting, okay?" I just nodded with a smile. The smile of a wolf waiting for its prey to come out of the cave. As soon as the sound of his car's engine completely vanished, my performance ended. I started acting. I went directly to Ramiro's private home office. That heavy oak door was always tightly closed. IT was his inviolable sanctuary, a place even I could not access without his permission. But he didn't know I had always kept a set of spare keys for the whole house, carefully hidden in an old keepsake box that I took out the small key and inserted it into the lock. The sound of metal clashing seemed deafening to me in the midst of silence. The door opened, and a mixture of leather and paper flooded my senses. That was the place where once we chose together every desk, every curtain, but now it felt as alien as the territory of an enemy. My goal was clear. The large hidden steel safe behind the oil painting off a landscape of the Pila Valley. I removed the picture. The digital display on the safe appeared. My heart was beating strongly. In my chest, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. Before, when we were still a real married couple, the safe's code was our wedding anniversary date. Trembling, I dialed that family combination. The screen flickered red. Incorrect password. He had changed it. A bitter feeling ran through my chest. He had erased every last trace off our marriage. I stood still for a moment. I took a deep breath. I tried Guillermo's birth date. That didn't work either. Suddenly a bitter thought crossed my mind. What was truly most important to Ramiro? Neither his wife, nor his SON. IT was his career. The money. That company was now trying to snatch from me. I dialed another combination. The date our company was founded. A sharp click broke the silence. The heavy safe door opened. For a moment, I felt infinite bitterness. Even the password revealed where he had placed his heart. Inside the safe there was a thick pile of documents. I knew I didn't have much time, but I didn't take anything. Instead, I took out the portable scanner I had. Prepared and began to copy carefully each page, and then I found it right on top, as if he were challenging me. A loan agreement for 8.1 billion pesos with a clandestine finance company, with no collateral other than 50% of my shares in the company. At the bottom of the page, under the legend guarantor's signature, was the name Alma Lopez. IT looked incredibly similar to mine. The soft stroke, the inclination, the pressure. Everything was perfect, but I noticed it right away. It lacked that final, decisive turn, my personal habit when signing, an impossible brand to imitate. IT was a perfect copy, but soulless. A shiver of fury ran down my back. I kept looking. Transfer documents for the use of several valuable company Plotsto, a completely unknown name. DNR Future Holdings. I didn't need to guess that the D was for Daniela and the R for Ramiro. His audacity knew no bounds. Below were bank statements in Switzerland and Panama, names I had never heard before, enormous sums being transferred after scanning. Everything. I put everything back exactly in its place. Without leaving the slightest trace, I closed the safe, hung the picture back in its seat, and closed the office door. No evidence remained. I didn't waste a second. I drove straight to Lupita's office. She was my best friend from university, a smart, sharp woman, and currently the top lawyer in the city's most prominent economic firm. Lupita was the only person I could trust at that moment. I entered her office and placed the freshly printed document package from the scanner on the table. Lupita looked at me, surprised by the tension on my face, then concentrated on the papers. She checked each sheet carefully. Her expression became increasingly serious. She frowned, took a magnifying glass, and examined the signature on the loan agreement closely. After a long while, she lifted her gaze toward me, with eyes filled with fury, as if she felt the rage in my soul. "This is a forgery, an organized scam, prepared with great care. If this loan is released, you're going to lose everything. Not just your shares. You'll be left with a huge debt." I told her everything calmly. What I had heard, what I had seen in the office, the relationship between Ramiro and Daniela, the baby she was expecting. Lupita listened without interrupting me. When I finished, she leaned over the table and took my hand tightly. Her voice was filled with indignation. "Damned bastards, they not only betrayed you, they also want to destroy you. Alma, we need to move before they manage to make everything disappear. There isn't much time left." Upon leaving Lupita's office, I felt a strange relief. The weight I had carried alone for weeks had finally lightened. The fog in my head had dissipated, and only one clear path remained. Crystal clear. I already had all the weapons. Now I just needed to choose the battlefield. After speaking with Lupita, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. My revenge needed a spectacular final act. And to achieve it, I had to make my enemies lower their guard until they removed their masks on their OW and MY plan began on Monday morning, did on purpose. I got up later than usual, without preparing a full breakfast for Ramiro, as I used to do. When he entered the kitchen, he only saw me sitting distractedly in front of the empty table, with a cup of already cold tea in my hands. He frowned, somewhat annoyed. "And breakfast? Don't you feel well?" I looked at him with tired, empty eyes, rubbed my temples, and answered in a weak voice. "I don't know why I've had a lot of headaches lately. I've also been losing my memory. IT must be my age." His annoyed expression disappeared immediately, and instead a fleeting gleam appeared in his eyes. One he tried to hide, but I noticed. He came closer, put a hand on my shoulder, and said in a worried tone, "Don't overthink it. Just relax, I'll take care of everything." I continued acting throughout that week. I became an old lady in full deterioration. While putting away the dishes, I deliberately dropped my favorite Portuguese tableware. When Ramiro asked, I just said, confused, "Oh, I've been so clumsy lately. I forgot the dentist appointment I had scheduled the previous week. I even called the housekeeper by the wrong name several times." Every small gesture, every distracted word, was another brick in the image of Alma Lopez, confused, tired, and without control over anything. At the end of the week, I called Guillermo. Upon hearing my son's voice on the phone, my heart sank. I had to lie to the person I loved most in my life. With a trembling voice, I said, "Guillermo, I miss you so much. This weekend, bring Daniela to dinner with us. It's been a while since we were all together." I knew that by simply saying that, Daniela wouldn't refuse. The dinner took place in the atmosphere I had planned. Incidentally, I cooked carelessly. The soup was as salty as the sea, and the meat tasteless. Ramiro frowned several times, but said nothing. Perhaps he was enjoying seeing my supposed deterioration. Only Daniela, with her immaturity and arrogance, blurted out, "Mom, I think you went a little too far with the salt in the soup." That was exactly what I expected. I pretended to be startled, clumsily dropped the chopsticks, and put on a look of regret. "Really? Oh no. I've been so distracted lately, sorry, children." Guillermo hastened to say, "It's okay, Mom, you're probably tired." He looked at me with concern, and that broke my heart even more. I waited until dessert, when everyone was having tea and fruit. I took a deep breath. It was time to cast the line, and I let out a sigh, my gaze lost in the garden behind the window. Lately there is too much work at the company. I feel like I have no strength left to continue with everything. Just looking at the papers makes my head spin like a fish in water. Ramiro seized the opportunity immediately. He placed the teacup on the table with a voice that pretended to be kind. "I've already told you, love. Rest. Let me take care of everything." I turned to look at him directly in the eyes and threw a quick glance at Daniela, who was pretending to concentration peeling an apple, but had her ears wide open. I spoke slowly, with a confident tone. I've thought about this a lot. The 30th anniversary of the company is approaching, and I want to take advantage of this important ditto, do something truly meaningful. I paused briefly, letting everyone's curiosity reach its peak. Guillermo also looked at me, waiting. I am going to officially announce that I will transfer 50% of my shares in the company to your name. From now on, you, Ramiro, will be the sole owner with full authority to make all decisions. The atmosphere in the dining room became tense. Guillermo was the first to react. So surprised he almost dropped his cup. Mother, how did you decide something like that so suddenly? Those shares are your whole life, your effort. I moved my hand as if downplaying its importance, forcing a tired smile. I'm exhausted, son. Now I just want to enjoy my old age, taking care of my grandson who is about to be born. There's no one better than your father to take charge of the company. It puts my mind at ease knowing it will be in his hands. And at that moment I saw them. Ramiro and Daniela's glances crossed for barely a second, but it was enough for me to see everything. A flash of greed impossible to hide, of absolute satisfaction. Ramiro nodded slightly toward Daniela in a subtle way, but it did not escape me. I didn't miss a thing. Daniela spoke immediately, placing a hand dramatically on her belly. Mom, always thinking of us, I'm sure Dad Ramiro will be excellent. With him in charge, you'll be able to rest much more. Her voice was sweet as honey, but inside, she couldn't hide her joy in the days that followed. Ramiro was kinder to me than ever. He brought me flowers every day, gave me expensive gifts, said sweet words I hadn't heard in years. He went all out playing the role of the grateful, happy husband. A few days later handed me a stack of documents, saying they were preliminary procedures for the transfer of shares that needed my signature so the lawyer could prepare them. Just sign here. Loved, I'll take care of the rest. I took the pen, making my hand tremble like that of a frail old woman. I signed with an awkward, careless signature, completely different from my usual firm and elegant one. I knew this was just a test to see if I had really lost control. When Ramiro picked up the paper to check it, I saw him begin to smile, a contemptuous smile. He was convinced I was a senile old woman, easy to manipulate. The day of the company's 30th anniversary arrived. It wasn't just a milestone for the company. It was also the setting for the final act of my marriage. For weeks I had lived inside a lie, pretending to be a confused old woman. But today I was going to take off that mask. I stood in front of the mirror, contemplating my reflection. It was no longer a tired and defeated Alma. I chose a silk evening gown in emerald green, the color of rebirth and power. The dress hugged my figure, highlighting the firmness that time had not been able to erase. I applied my makeup carefully, outlining my eyes well, painting my lips a deep red. Finally, I put on the pearl necklace Emmy's mother had left me. The pearls shone like dried tears, reminding me of the strength forged from pain. Tonight, I was not the victim. I was the one who passes judgment. Before leaving home, my phone vibrated. A brief message from Victor. Everything is ready. Good luck. Right after, Lupita called with her firm voice. Alma, my colleagues and I will be among the crowd. Do what you have to do. We are here to support you. Her support was like a tranquilizer, helping to calm my racing heart. I went downstairs. Ramiro was already waiting for me, dressed in an elegant designer suit and with an air of power. When he saw me, his eyes shone with greed, as if he were looking at a property that would soon belong to him. He approached and extended his hand. You look beautiful tonight, Alma. I placed my hand on his, feeling the cold of his skin transfer to mine. I just smiled. A smile he couldn't understand. It was the smile of an executioner before the execution. The hotel where the party was held was the most luxurious in Zacatecas. The great hall was decorated with splendor, enormous crystal chandeliers illuminating the entire space. The guests were the entire elite of the city. Business people, politicians, influential people. Everything was perfect for a great show. As soon as Ramiro and I walked in, we became the center of attention. He took me everywhere, receiving congratulations, handshakes. With pride, he introduced me as his exemplary wife, his great ally who would soon retire from the stage. I just smiled and nodded, fulfilling my role. In a corner of the room, I saw Guillermo and Daniela, MY's son, naive and oblivious to everything, looked handsome in his suit. Next to him, Daniela, wearing a cream-colored maternity dress, always with one hand on her belly, smiling shyly and with apparent innocence. They seemed like a happy and perfect family, a beautiful image painted with fake colors. When I saw Guillermo, I felt a knot in my chest. I knew that tonight would be the most painful moment of his life, but that pain was necessary to save him from a life based on deception. Taking advantage of Ramiro being busy socializing, I walked silently toward the sound and lighting control area. The manager there was the son of an old friend of mine, a smart and trustworthy young man with whom I had already spoken. I handed him the small USB drive Victor had prepared. "This is what we talked about," I whispered. "When I give you the signal, put it on the big screen. It doesn't matter if even Mr. Ramiro orders you to turn it off. Don't stop until it's finished. Understood?" He looked at me with determination. "Understood, Mrs. Alma. You can trust me." I returned to Ramiro's side just as the master of ceremonies was beginning the program. After some grandiloquent words, he solemnly invited me, the hostess of the evening, the powerful woman behind the success of the business group, to go up on stage and say a few words. All the lights focused on me. The hall, filled with hundreds of people, fell completely silent. I went up on stage, each step firm and full of confidence. I took the microphone. I inhaled deeply. My voice sounded warm and sincere, but with intense emotional charge. 30 years ago, this company was just a dream in a narrow rented office. There were nights when my husband and I shared a single loaf of bread, but in our hearts an unwavering faith always burned. With sweat and tears we built this empire from scratch. I looked toward the first row where Ramiro was sitting, chest puffed out, with a look of self-sufficiency. And the person who was always by my side throughout this journey, my unconditional support to overcome every storm, is none other than my husband, Ramiro. I paused and directed an affectionate, though feigned, look toward him. The entire audience applauded enthusiastically. Ramiro nodded and smiled proudly. I raised my voice, carrying the speech to its highest point. "I've come a long way, and now it's time to rest. That is why today, before all of you, my friends, close partners, I want to make an important announcement. I am officially retiring. The entire management and 50% of my shares will be delivered to him at the company." The auditorium erupted in deafening applause. Ramiro went up on stage amid cheers. He hugged me tightly, a fake hug that made me nauseous, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you, Alma. You made the right decision." He took the microphone from my hands and began his speech. He talked nonstop about the future and new vision, taking the company to the international sphere. He presented himself as a savior, a great leader entrusted with a mission. Guillermo kept applauding, his eyes shining with admiration for his father. Daniela looked at him with devotion she wasn't even trying to hide. When Ramiro's speech reached its peak, when he lifted his glass of Juanito toast the new era, I knew the moment had arrived. I stepped back silently, moving away from the main spotlight, and directed my gaze toward the technical booth. I raised my hand to give the signal. As soon as I did, all the stage lights went out, plunging Ramiro into darkness in the blink of an eye. The wine glass in his hand trembled. The soft celebratory music came to an abrupt halt, leaving the auditorium in almost absolute silence. From the darkness, only a beam of light illuminated the giant LED screen behind Ramiro, making it the sole focal point. The entire audience was perplexed. Murmurs began. Everyone thought it was a technical failure. Ramiro, deprived of his moment of glory, turned around abruptly, annoyed, looking backstage with a superior face, about to reprimand. "What kind of technical work is this?" He growled into the microphone, but the response he received was not an apology. The screen lit up. IT was not the company logo or bright commemorative images. IT was a close-up photo, clear down to the smallest detail. Ramiro and Daniela kissing passionately in his car. A gasp of astonishment swept through the room like a wave. People started looking at each other, then fixed their eyes on the screen again. A.T. Guillermo, who was in the front row, MY's son suddenly stood up, face distraught and pale, As if the air had been torn from his chest, Ramiro paled, his eyes wide open with panic. He stammered into the microphone, voice no longer carrying authority. There must be a mistake here. Technician, turn that off. Turn it off now." But nobody did. Technician kept his promise. The next image appeared, even crueler. The two of them holding hands, entering a cheap motel on the outskirts, the kind Ramiro always looked down on like a pigsty. Some guests started pulling out their Fenesto record and take photos. Flashes began to light up, turning my family's tragedy into a show for the whole city. Then the screen went black. Suddenly, a chilling silence enveloped everything. 30 years ago, this company was just a dream in a narrow rented office. There were nights when my husband and I shared a single loaf of bread, but in our hearts an unwavering faith always burned. With sweat and tears we built this empire from scratch. I looked toward the first row where Ramiro was sitting, chest puffed out, with a look of self-sufficiency. And the person who was always by my side throughout this journey, my unconditional support to overcome every storm, is none other than my husband, Ramiro. I paused and directed an affectionate, though feigned, look toward him. The entire audience applauded enthusiastically. Ramiro nodded and smiled proudly. I raised my voice, carrying the speech to its highest point. "I've come a long way, and now it's time to rest. That is why today, before all of you, my friends, close partners, I want to make an important announcement. I am officially retiring. The entire management and 50% of my shares will be delivered to him at the company." The auditorium erupted in deafening applause. Ramiro went up on stage amid cheers. He hugged me tightly, a fake hug that made me nauseous, and whispered in my ear, "Thank you, Alma. You made the right decision." He took the microphone from my hand. "It's been manipulated. It's a trap to sink me." Right at that moment, I stepped out from the shadows that I stood under the spotlight in front of him. I took another microphone, and my voice resonated with strength and clarity, overcoming his screams. "There is no mistake, Ramiro. Everything that happened today is a work directed by Miss Selfdo. Unmask who you really are and your lover, and you too, dear daughter-in-law." Then I turned to look directly into Ramiro's eyes, now overwhelmed with panic and absolute hatred. "You said I was a silly old woman who just wandered around the house. So tell me now, who's the real fool?" In front of hundreds of eyes and cameras, I took the divorce papers already signed by me out of my bag. I lifted them really high, as if it were a final verdict. "Our marriage is officially over here, and so that you can no longer deceive anyone else, I have sent all the evidence for your forgery of signatures and fraud to the Department of Justice. I suppose they're already on their way." I had barely finished speaking when, as if everything were choreographed, the sound of patrol car sirens began to be heard from the main entrance, getting louder, getting sharper. Chaos erupted. Guests stood up in alarm. Daniela, in a panic attack, pushed Guillermo and ran off the stage, wearing high heels and beside herself. She tripped on the icy marble steps. A heart-rending scream filled the place. Everyone froze, seeing blood begin to flow through the cream-colored dress she was wearing. The main doors of the auditorium opened suddenly. Two police officers in uniform, serious-faced, entered and walked straight to the stage. They looked at no one but Ramiro. One of them read aloud the arrest warrant for large-scale financial fraud and breach of trust. The cold steel handcuffs closed over his wrists in front of everyone. The empire he had tried to steal. When the patrol car sirens taking Ramiro away began to fade, and the ambulance urgently left for the hospital with Daniela, the chaos in the auditorium began to calm down. Guests gradually left, taking with them murmurs and the most scandalous story they had ever witnessed. The grand 30th anniversary party was now a mess, like a battlefield. Elegant tables in disarray, broken wine glasses scattered on the floor, decorative ribbons hanging sadly like tears. In the midst of that chaos, I looked for my son Guillermo. He was still in the same place, in the front row, among the remains of broken glass and the cruel truth that had just befallen his life. His eyes were empty, fixed on the void, facing the bright stage where the family tragedy had unfolded. He looked like a forgotten statue in a ruined city. I approached slowly, without making a sound, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Guillermo, let's go home." He didn't react. His body was rigid under my hand. His eyes remained fixed on a lost point. I knew his soul had been shattered. I had to ask Victor, who had stayed until the end, and some close friendsto helped take him to the car. All the way back home, he didn't say a word. He just sat looking out the window, but I knew he couldn't see anything. Upon arriving, Guillermo went upstairs, silent Lido, his old childhood room, the one he still kept. He closed the door, and the sound of the lock was like an absolute barrier against the world. The following days were the hardest I've ever lived through. Guillermo locked himself in his room. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. It's been manipulated. It's a trap to sink me. Right at that moment, I stepped out from the shadows and I stood under the spotlight in front of him. I took another microphone, and my voice resonated with strength and clarity, overcoming his screams. There is no mistake, Ramiro. Everything that happened today is a work directed by Miss Selfdo. Unmask who you really are and your lover. And you too, dear daughter-in-law. Then I turned to look directly into Ramiro's eyes, now overwhelmed with panic and absolute hatred. You said I was a silly old woman who just wandered around the house. So tell me now, who's the real fool? In front of hundreds of eyes and cameras, I took the divorce papers already signed by me out of my bag. I lifted them really high, as if it were a final verdict. Our marriage is officially over here, and so that you can no longer deceive anyone else, I have sent all the evidence for your forgery of signatures and fraud to the Department of Justice. I suppose they're already on their way. I had barely finished speaking when, as if everything were choreographed, the sound of patrol car sirens began to be heard from the main entrance, getting louder, getting sharper. Chaos erupted. Guests stood up in alarm. Daniela, in a panic attack, pushed Guillermo and ran off the stage, wearing high heels and beside herself. She tripped on the icy marble steps. A heart-rending scream filled the place. Everyone froze, seeing blood begin to flow through the cream-colored dress she was wearing. The main doors of the auditorium opened suddenly. Two police officers in uniform, serious-faced, entered and walked straight to the stage. They looked at no one but Ramiro. One of them read aloud the arrest warrant for large-scale financial fraud and breach of. I showed him Victor's file. Every photo, every note. In the end, I gave him the document that would perhaps hurt him the most. The result of the infertility test Daniela had hidden for years. He stared at it. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. He didn't cry. He just stood there, motionless, with a lost look. His silence was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. Then he looked up and looked at me, and for the first time in days, tears began to flow. Not sobs, but tears of despair that flowed silently down his emaciated face. He reached out and took my hand. His hands were bony and cold as ice. His voice broke between sobs. I should have noticed it sooner. I should have been the one who protected you. Mom, I was too blind and I left you to fight alone. But in the end it was you who ended up saving us both. I drew him to my chest, wrapping my arms around me, poor son's trembling shoulders. I could no longer hold back the tears. It's not your fault, Guillermo. Love blinds us. It is not your fault that you loved and trusted. The guilty ones are those who trampled that love and that trust. The truth, even though it hurts, opens our eyes. I stroked his back like when he was a child. A few weeks passed, and Guillermo gradually regained his composure. The pain was still there, etched in his eyes, but he was no longer a broken man, someone hardened by life. With Lupita's advice, he officially filed the unilateral divorce petition against Daniela, thus breaking the last tie that bound him to the woman who destroyed his life. Meanwhile, Lupita kept me informed of the progress of the case against Ramiro. It turned out to be much more serious and complex than I imagined. In addition to the fraud and forgery charges for which I had provided evidence, the police investigation uncovered an entire network of illegal commercial operations. It turned out the 8.1 billion peso debt that tried to saddle me with was just the tip of a huge iceberg. For years, Ramiro had used the company as a front for money laundering and bribing officials, all to grease the wheels of his real estate project. He had built an empire based on lies and crimes. As for Daniela, after losing the baby and recovering physically, she was also prosecuted as an accomplice in the scam. She was released on bail by her family, but forbidden to leave the country and had to await trial on the day of the trial. The courtroom in the municipal building was packed, not a single seat left free, full of journalists and onlookers who wanted to witness the outcome of one of the biggest scandals Zacatecas had ever seen. Guillermo and I were in the front row. I gently placed my hand on his, transmitting some warmth. He lightly squeezed my hand in response. We had crossed the storm together, and today we would face the end together. The side door opened. Ramiro was escorted in by 2 police officers. He wore a gray prison uniform that was too big for him and made him look much thinner and emaciated. His once impeccable hair was now gray and disheveled. But when his gaze swept the room and stopped on us, I still saw in his eyes that undiminished fire of hatred. Daniela appeared right after. She no longer had that sweet, innocent appearance. She wore an expensive black dress, meticulously made up, trying to maintain a haughty and indifferent expression. But the dark circles under her eyes and her hands clenched tightly around a designer handbag betrayed the fear consuming her from the inside. The trial began when Guillermo's lawyer presented the evidence of infidelity and Daniela's deceitful plan. She showed no remorse. When the judge gave her the floor, she stood up, looking not at the judge but staring intently at Guillermo. Her voice was cold and venomous like snake poison. What did I do wrong? He couldn't give me a child. Was I supposed to waste my life waiting for a useless man? I needed someone who could secure my future, a real man. Guillermo just looked at her in silence, without any expression on his face. His silence was an act of contempt more powerful than any answer. He was no longer the naive young man he once was. Then it was Ramiro's turn. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of his financial crimes, he offered no defense. Instead, he directed all his anger toward me. He looked at me and let out a mocking laugh, a crooked, deformed smile on his emaciated face. "Look at her," he said, joining the crowd in chorus. And I showed him Victor's file. Every photo, every note. In the end, I gave him the document that would perhaps hurt him the most. The result of the infertility test Daniela had hidden for years. He stared at it. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. He didn't cry. He just stood there, motionless, with a lost look. His silence was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. Then he looked up and looked at me, and for the first time in days, tears began to flow. Not sobs, but tears of despair that flowed silently down his emaciated face. He reached out and took my hand. His hands were bony and cold as ice. His voice broke between sobs. I should have noticed it sooner. I should have been the one who protected you. Mom, I was too blind." The accused, Ramiro Lopez, is found guilty of organized financial fraud, abuse of trust, and other related crimes. The court sentences him to 15 years in prison. The accused, Daniela Vargas, accomplice in fraud and document forgery. The court sentences her to 3 years in prison. The divorce petition between Mr. Guillermo Lopez and Mrs. Daniela Vargas approved immediately. The judge banged the gavel, putting an end to everything. All the assets Ramiro and Daniela had tried to seize, including land and illegal bank accounts, were restored to me, their rightful owner. By court order. As the police escorted Ramiro and Daniela out of the premises, their eyes met for a moment. There was no compassion or repentance, only mutual resentment. Each believed their misfortune had been caused by the other. Their theater ended in tragedy, as expected. Guillermo and I left the courthouse. Together, a flood of reporters came crashing down on us. The flashes kept blinking. This time we didn't hide. We walked with our heads held high, pushing through the crowd, facing the light. The following months were a whirlwind of nonstop work. The company, after the Ramiro scandal, was like a ship adrift. I had to take the helm myself. I took charge of all management, resolving the financial devastation and undoing the murky commercial alliances Ramiro had left behind. I had to face confused shareholders, reassure hundreds of employees afraid of losing their jobs, and restore the trust of our partners. There were days I worked from dawn until midnight, with only coffee and financial reports for company. But I didn't feel tired. On the contrary, work helped me discover that strong, determined woman I had forgotten during years off being just a wife and mother. While I immersed myself in the company, Guillermo sank into his own silence. After the entire divorce process ended, one day he came to see me. His eyes were lighter, though they still carried sadness. "Mom, I think I need to leave this city for a while. Everything here reminds me of things I'd rather forget. I need to find myself again." I looked him in the eyes and I understood. He needed space to heal wounds no one else could cure. I nodded and hugged him. "Go, son, go wherever you want, but remember Mom will always be here, waiting for you." He sold the little house where he had lived with Daniela. That place full of memories of fake happiness. With a backpack on his shoulder, he undertook a journey without destination, without itinerary. Sometimes he sent me postcards from faraway lands, a secluded beach in Oaxaca, an ancient village in Chiapas. He didn't write much, just a few lines. But I knew little by little he was finding peace. A year later, I received a phone call, and on the other end of the line was Guillermo's voice, but it sounded much more cheerful and alive. "Mom, I'm in San Miguel de Allende. I'm ready. I want to come back. I want to start over. But this time from the beginning, with my own feet, without depending on anyone." I smiled. The accused, Ramiro Lopez, is found guilty of organized financial fraud, abuse of trust, and other related crimes. The court sentences him to 15 years in prison. The accused, Daniela Vargas, accomplice in fraud and document forgery. The court sentences her to 3 years in prison. The divorce petition between Mr. Guillermo Lopez and Mrs. Daniela Vargas approved immediately. The judge banged the gavel, putting an end to everything. All the assets Ramiro and Daniela had tried to seize, including land and illegal bank accounts, were restored to me, their rightful owner. By court order. As the police escorted Ramiro and Daniela out of the premises, their eyes met for a moment. There was no compassion or repentance, only mutual resentment. Each believed their misfortune had been caused by the other. Their theater ended in tragedy, as expected. Guillermo and I left the courthouse. Together, a flood of reporters came crashing down on us. The flashes kept blinking. This time we didn't hide. We walked with our heads held high, pushing through the crowd, facing the light. The following months were a whirlwind of nonstop work. The company, after the Ramiro scandal, was like a ship adrift. I had to take the helm myself. I took charge of all management, resolving the financial devastation and undoing the murky commercial alliances Ramiro had left behind. I had to face confused shareholders, reassure hundreds of employees afraid of losing their jobs, and restore the trust of our partners. There were days I worked from dawn until midnight, with only coffee and financial reports for company. But I didn't feel tired. On the contrary, work helped me discover that strong, determined woman I had forgotten during years off being just a wife and mother. While I immersed myself in the company, Guillermo sank into his own silence. After the entire divorce process ended, one day he came to see me. His eyes were lighter, though they still carried sadness. "Mom, I think I need to leave this city for a while. Everything here reminds me of things I'd rather forget. I need to find myself again." I looked him in the eyes and I understood. He needed space to heal wounds no one else could cure. I nodded and hugged him. "Go, son, go wherever you want, but thank you for everything." I stepped down, leaving the stage to him. To the new generation, my battle was truly over. In the following years, I never remarried. My heart already had enough scars. I dedicated time to myself, to the things I had postponed. I founded a scholarship in my mother's name for women victims of domestic violence and romantic deception, so they could study, become financially independent, and rebuild their lives. I returned to my rose garden, to my dusty books. Every morning I woke up with a cup of aromatic coffee, sat on the terrace, gazed at the sunrise, and smiled. I've been through hell and survived to tell my story, not as a victim, but as a warrior. My life did not end in the tragedy of betrayal. It began again, more gloriously, right from the place where I thought everything was over. I once believed life would always be calm if one was good and trusted those close to them, but it was precisely those years that blinded me, surrendering all my power and my heart to people who didn't deserve it. After everything that happened, I learned that a woman cannot afford to be weak in the face of adversity nor leave her fate in anyone's hands. Strength lies not in seeking revenge with hatred, but in having the clarity, courage, and resolve to restore justice with intelligence and cunning. I didn't rise just to save myself. I also saved my son from a life shrouded in lies. This life can push you to the depths of pain, but if you don't break, you will be reborn stronger, sharper, and much harder to destroy. That has been the most important lesson. Tough, I've learned, and also the most valuable gift I want to leave to all women who walk in the dark believing they are alone. You yourselves are the light. The story you just heard has been modified in names and placesto protect the identity of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but with the hope that someone will hear it and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering silently inside their own homes? Really, I wonder, what would it be like if you were in my shoes? What would you do? Would you choose to remain silento, maintain peace? Or would you dare to face it alto, get your voice back? I'd like to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for another person. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Now, on the final screen, I'm going to leave you with two of the most beloved stories on the channel. I think you're going to be surprised. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.